see.
All right, so remember, guys, you have to open your mic and you have to participate. All right, so let's go. All right, so the first one, you seen the first one? So basically what you will be doing is that the clues that are on the paper, it will form something very familiar to you. It may be familiar to some or it may not be familiar to some. All right, but for example, I'll just show you what the first one is. So this one, we realize that we have 7 C's. So that's the answer.
Ah.
7 C's. So, and it also gives you a term. So it's a figurative term for all the C's known in the world. All right, so we move on to the next one. All right, so let's go now. Pretty sure you're familiar with what's going on now.
Crossroads.
All right. And crossroads are intersections of two roads. Moving right along. This one, no. Who can guess this one?
Middle, underage, middle age.
Yes, you were right the first time.
Middle-aged.
Yes, so it's middle-aged. And this is the period after adulthood and before old age. Normally between 45 and 60. Next one.
Water under bridge.
Yes, that's good. Why it sound like it's only one person know the answers?
Diana on a roll.
All right, moving right along. Yes, so water under the bridge is basically events that have passed and consequently no longer to be regarded as important. So somebody tell us, hey, yeah, water under the bridge, them tell us they're not important. But let's hope nobody told you that. All right, this one now.
Nerve-wracking.
Yes, that's nerve-wracking. Yes, so it's basically causing great stress or anxiety. Next one.
Tongue tie.
Tongue twister.
Yes. All right, so twisted or tied, a phrase or sentence difficult to articulate between a succession of a similar consonantal sound. Next one.
5 feet underground.
How much?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet underground.
Yeah, 6 feet underground.
My bad, sorry.
And that's basically the depth at which, they always say that they're supposed to go 6 feet under the ground. All right, next one. All right, this one now.
Earthquake.
No.
Earth.
4 corners of the earth.
Yes, that's correct. All right, so 4 corners of the earth, and this is basically the 4 ends of the world. All right, this one now. Some of you love this, or some of you is this type of person. Yes, that's correct. All right, so person who is sweet tooth, who basically has great liking for things that are sweet. Next one.
This one is easy.
Some of you wish this
It's
is
happy hour.
yes,
Happy hour.
yes. So, and happy hour is basically time taken just to enjoy and appreciate. This one now. Come on.
Top secret.
Yes, that's correct. All right. So when somebody tells us something is top secret, then we know that it is highly confidential. Next one. This one.
Once in a blue moon.
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow.
Somebody says something is once in a blue moon. We know that it is very, very rare. This one.
First aid.
First
Yes.
aid kit.
Yes, that's correct. All right. So something first aid, emergency, or immediate care. Next one.
1 in a million.
Yes, that's correct. All right. So that thank you guys for your participation. Somebody says that you are 1 in a million, then you are a very, very special person. That comes to the end of our icebreaker. And as you go throughout the day, just remember that you are 1 in a million. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha Gay, for getting us all warmed up and ready to absorb more information and to, continue to participate. So at this time, Javario will be introducing our speaker for today.
All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Denise, are you hearing me? Can somebody just indicate?
I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Dr. Garth Lips is a professor of applied psychology, University of the West Indies, Mona. He teaches graduate courses in psychometrics, research design, program evaluation, dissemination skills, and psychological assessment in organizations, masters and doctoral students in the applied psychology and organizational behavior programs and psychometrics to undergraduate students. Professor Lips is the coordinator for the undergraduate major in psychology and the applied psychology graduate program. Research broadly focuses on the factors that influence the development of adolescent depression, job satisfaction, and burnout among healthcare professionals, social relationships, and loneliness. In particular, research focuses on how 2 factors impact these variables. Most recently, he has conducted research on the influence of academic tracking, parenting practices, and neighborhood factors on adolescent depression across the Caribbean. Dr. Lips received his PhD in applied social psychology from the University of Saskatchewan and a master's in clinical psychology from the University of Brunswick. He is the author or co-author of numerous articles and reports covering adolescent depression, childhood, education, development, and the higher education and suggestive well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, here to share with us, please make welcome Professor Dr. Garth Lips.
Over to you, Dr. Lips. If you're speaking, Dr. Lips, we're not hearing you.
So sorry. I forgot to turn my microphone on.
That's fine.
And I'd seen people were coming in the room. And so I thought you'd given me control. My fault, my fault. So how are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, I'm reasonably good. I'm reasonably good. That was a nice introduction. And I guess you're going to turn it over so I can give my presentation?
Yes, you're able to share now.
Yeah, okay. So let me share my screen. Here we go. And we're gonna make it big. Oh, something didn't go. There we go. There we go. Okie doke. Let me just make one small adjustment. Oh, no, you can't. Okay. Okay. So today I'm going to talk to you about getting into graduate school or gaining admission. Okay. So as you probably know, getting into a graduate program in psychology is very, very difficult. Most programs in clinical psych receive anywhere between 100 to 300 applications, and they typically take 6 to 8 students every year. At UE Mona, we receive approximately 80 applications for the MSc in clinical psychology and 70 to 80 applications for the MSc in applied psychology. Both of these programs accept only 8 to 10 students. So you stand a better chance applying here, a 1 in 10 chance versus 1 in 30, okay? But you can see that it's easier to get into medical school, dental school, or vet med than graduate school in psychology. So one word of advice, plan ahead and save you money, as a process of applying typically takes a year. So you spend about a year preparing to apply for graduate school. And you should plan to apply to 5 to 15 programs. The more you can afford, the better. And I should say, you should apply to the best, the worst, and the somewhat questionable. Meaning apply to the well-known programs that are internationally renowned, apply to the very worst programs, and then the ones in the middle. And in that way, you know where you're going in September. If you're lucky, you get in the best. If you're very unlucky and the competition is very, very stringent, you've got lots of very bright competitors, you might get in the worst, but most often you'll get into a middle range school. And what I can say is I've seen several students who only apply to the very, very best schools, and they keep applying and they never get in. And eventually they become very discouraged by the process. And it's really because they're only applying to Stanford and Princeton, for example. So make sure you apply to the best, the worst, and the somewhat questionable. Okay, so don't apply only to the top 1 or 2 programs. You should start to prepare for graduate school in the summer after your second year or your first semester of your third year, okay? This is because most programs' application deadlines are in December or January. So you can see that if you're starting now and you're in your third year, you have roughly, if the deadline is December 1st, about a month. And if it's January 1st, it's 2 months, okay? So you need to plan at least 3 or more months of you working to put forward your applications, to develop your statements of intent, okay? And make sure you start before you graduate, okay? Or before the final semester of your, or the first semester of your final year, okay? You need to start this process early because most of the school's deadlines are in January, okay? I started the process in the summer before I finished my bachelor's degree. You'll need this time to do several things. First, to study and prepare for the graduate record exam, and you should use the summer between your second and third year to begin studying. Second, you need to identify potential programs that you would like to apply to. Okay, so identify some programs, do a lot of shopping around on the internet, and develop a short list. Then visit websites of potential programs. And almost all of the programs now have a website section for students who are interested in applying to this school. Once you've identified a program, then you need to identify lecturers at UWI who are willing to write reference letters for you. And you also need to actually get them to write the letters for you. That's one problem students often have. We as faculty agree to write a letter, but as time goes by and the semester goes on and our workload piles up, we become tardy, okay? In fact, sometimes we might even forget to submit a letter, okay? So you have to kind of manage the faculty. You need to save up to pay the application fees. There are forms that you'll need to complete. You'll have to write a statement of interest or purpose, and then you need to identify and contact potential supervisors in each program. So the first thing you need to do is plan to write the graduate record exam. It costs approximately, well, it costs $205 US to write the general test. Okay, so most programs require the general test, and some programs require the psychology subject test. So all in all, just simply writing the GR is going to cost you about $355 US. Then the educational testing service who administer the GRE charge $27 to send your scores to each program, okay? I think they give you 1 or 2 free scores. So you can see that you need to have about $490 US if you're applying to 5 schools, and about $760 to apply to 15 schools. Then you also have to remember programs often charge about $100 US to apply. So the total cost of you applying to graduate school is somewhere between $990 US to $2,260. So you need to save, okay? When I was applying, there wasn't an application fee. You simply had to pay the GRE, and I saved up about $2,000 just for the process of applying, okay? Students often ask, can I get into graduate school without doing the GRE? Increasingly, schools are accepting students who have not taken the GRE. However, most schools still do require the GRE. So not taking the GRE will substantially limit the chances that you'll be accepted into a graduate program. The 2 graduate or all of the graduate programs in psychology across all the campuses do not require you to take the GRE, luckily. However, most programs in the US, Canada, and Europe will require that you have taken the graduate record exam. And often, if you're applying for an external scholarship, they will require you to write the GRE. So you can't really escape it. So I know many people don't like the standardized tests. The good news is you're not evaluated against norms for people from the US. You're evaluated using an international set of norms, which you're probably likely to do much better than other candidates. Okay. So as I said, you start in the second or the summer of your second year studying. Typically, you should plan to spend about 2 hours or more each day during the summer. I would strongly recommend that you purchase some test preparation books. They're available on Amazon, relatively inexpensive for anywhere between 15 to 30 US dollars. Most of them are falling into around 15. These books provide exercises that are designed to improve your score. They also tell you strategies for writing the GRE. Okay. The US Embassy, when they were open, sometimes offered free GRE preparation classes. So it went over about a semester. So they would take you through and put you through. If they offer it again, I would try to get into that because that is a customized approach essentially. Okay. And on the GRE, you want to score in the 75th percentile or higher, meaning your scores on the GRE are higher than 75% of all of the people who've applied. Okay, so you need to do very, very well. Okay. So how do programs screen applicants out? So what do they do? Well, most graduate programs have a process through which they screen and select candidates. The very first step is they do an initial screening of the applicants. And they do this by examining the GRE scores, or sometimes the academic transcripts. So what they do is, after looking at the GRE and possibly your GPA, they drop 1/2 to 2/3 of all the applicants. You pay all that money for your transcripts to be sent away to do the GRE, and then for the school you're applying, they just set a cutoff score for the GRE, and below that, they reject everybody. Okay. They do that in order to reduce the number of candidates they're considering. Of the remaining candidates, they then carefully look at your transcript, but they're not looking at all of your transcript. They're examining your grades in specific courses. So they're looking at your grades in statistics, research design, psychometrics, and a research paper. And the reason they look at these specific programs is that a low grade in one of these programs likely will slow you in finishing up your degree on time. Typically, it takes 3 years to, on average, to do a master's degree. And then from the master's degree to the PhD, it takes, on average, 6 years, okay? But you're expected to finish your master's degree in 2 years and your PhD in 4 years, okay? So if you have a low grade in statistics, research design, psychometrics, or especially the research paper, you're going to struggle to get in, okay? The grades in the other courses are given secondary weight. They don't really look at them very closely. They just generally look and say, oh, what's a general pattern of scores? May identify a semester where someone did poorly, that might have dropped their grade point average, and let's say, oh, they had a rough patch, okay? What I'm trying to say is the courses that are most important are stats, research design, psychometrics, and the research paper. Apart from that, if you're applying for clinical psychology, they don't care if you've done abnormal psychology. They don't care if you've done personality. They're not looking for specific courses. They're looking for a well-rounded applicant, someone who has some courses in the 5 core areas of psychology, okay? Once they have gone past the looking at your grades in overall, the next step are they look at your references and they scrutinize them for any problems, okay? So what you will find is that when you read the reference, they're always phrased in positive terms. They're virtually never phrased in negative ways, but there are subtleties in which the positive terms are phrased, which signals difficulty, such as it's a student who strongly works for success. That is a code word for they're not the brightest student. So they carefully look over the references, and the reference they pay the most attention to is your research supervisor, if you're doing the year-long research paper, or someone that you've done research with. And that's because of two reasons. First, that person is probably going to know you the best. And secondly, that person knows how well you can carry out a research project. What slows people down from graduating on time is the research project. So what they pay a lot of attention to is that research project, okay? Some programs will review or interview potential applicants. They don't necessarily interview the top people at UE. For the applied program, at least, generally we don't review the top people. We just simply accept them. It is the people who are in the middle or the lower part who we actually interview, okay? So in the interview, we're looking for social maturity, intelligence, knowledge of psychology, and in particular, knowledge of the field in which you're applying, okay? So they will ask you, if you're applying for clinical psychology, what do you know about clinical psychology? And many students really don't fully know much about clinical psychology. They'll talk about counseling psychology. They won't talk about working with people with serious psychiatric disorders, etc. So most of what you have seen in TV and other things is really the positive side. Anyone who's applying to clinical psychology, I always ask them two questions. Could you work with a pedophile who's going to tell you in great detail how they rape children? And secondly, could you work with someone who is mildly mentally handicapped, or pardon me, not mildly, severely mentally handicapped, and loves to smear feces and wants to hug you up? Those are the kind of people you're going to meet in clinical psychology. You're not going to be meeting the person who has some marital problems. You're not going to be seeing people who are generally a little sad. You're going to be seeing people where their lives have fallen apart. Usually they have some moderate to severe problem that they're dealing with. And often they're not going to be from the same social class as you are. So you'll be dealing with a lot of people from the lower classes, people who are struggling to get by. And you may see some people from the upper quadrants of society, but they will be usually quite disordered. So clinical psychology, you have to be prepared to be working with people who are not the most pleasant people to work with, okay? Also, typically, you spend 50 to 60 hours a week working, and you spend a great deal of time writing up assessment reports. In fact, I think about a third of your time as a clinical psychologist is spent simply writing up the reports of the people you tested during the last week. The applied psychology program or an IO psychology program, they will ask you, what do you know about the discipline? And make sure you read up before the interview so you can have a good answer, because that is something that in an interview, if you do not demonstrate a credible understanding, they say, well, what else were you applying to? So you may get screened out, okay? Of the final pool of maybe 10 to 16 applicants, they're left with, after all of this process, the very final step in the process of selecting candidates is to look at their research interests. And they tend to select students whose research interests match one or more faculty members' interests. So you come down to a pool of very, very qualified people. However, you need to make some decision. The final deciding point is your research interests, okay? So you can see it's important to make sure you're applying to a program where there is a faculty member who's interested in doing research in your area, or to carefully examine the faculty member's interests and say, could I fit into their program of research? Okay. Some strategies to improve acceptance. Very first, identify what aspect of psychology you want to study, and do some research on what psychologists in the field typically do. As I've said, you want to study clinical psychology, that's the sort of golden coin that you can get, the penultimate indicator of success, but most people don't like it. In fact, they have about half of the people who start clinical psychology drop out. And they drop out because they don't like the people they're working with. They would have been better off in something like counseling psychology, or many of them turn, unfortunately, to doing other areas of psychology. Okay, so find out what area of psychology you want to study. Talk to some people who are in it to find out what it's like to do that area. Okay, so find out from people what it's like. Okay, and I can tell you, clinical psychologists in the US are the worst paid psychologists. The most highly paid psychologists are the industrial organizational psychologists, followed by the psych people who do psychometrics, and then followed by people in the applied areas of psychology, then counseling, and the lowest paid group are the clinical psychologists, much to the dismay of many clinical psychologists, okay? Okay, so once you know what area, what you want to do is you want to identify one or two people from each school that you plan to apply to, and you read their areas of current research and their past publications. Make sure you read some of the past publications, okay? Very few people actually read a faculty member's publications. I think the average number of people who read a published peer-reviewed paper is one. So if you're the second person who's read their work, they're very excited, okay? Also, it shows that you've done some background investigation. You've gone beyond simply just saying, oh, this program I've heard about, or I want to study clinical psychology. So you have a much better idea of where you're going, okay? So you obtain and carefully read these faculty members' papers, and then email them. stating that you've read their work and that you really like to study under them on their area of research, okay? And you ask them, are they taking in students in September? Some faculty, there's only so many people you're allowed to supervise, and most North American programs and in Europe, in North America or the UK or Australia, New Zealand, you're not supervising more than 2 PhD students and maybe 2 master's students. So they're only supervising 4 people over the length of the program. So many times faculty members may be interested in taking you on as a student, but they really can't devote the time. So they'll say that I'm not taking any students, okay? So communicate with them. Tell them you're interested in joining their research program, okay? One of the things that happens in graduate school is often they will match you to a supervisor which fits the closest they can find with your research interest, but that faculty member may not really know much about that topic, or they're just not interested in your topic. So usually, if you wish to leave graduate school the quickest, you adapt to a faculty member's research agenda, okay? Most faculty gain promotion through publications, and how do they gain promotion? They collaborate with their students as well as colleagues, okay? So having someone who is in your area working on your research agenda is a win-win for the student and the faculty member, okay? It's very important to prepare a separate statement of interest for each program you apply to, okay? Don't write a generic statement of interest for the clinical program, thinking that it will do as well for the applied program. Because if you come to the applied program, we will look and say, so we're your second choice? Are you really interested in applied psychology? And the clinical people will look and say, oh, but you also applied to applied psychology. So are you really interested in clinical? So apply to one program in one university. Don't apply to 2 programs in the same university. And the reason for that is they may share your statement of interest across areas. And so it begins to look like you don't quite know where you want to fit, and you look like the program you're applying for is your second choice. And nobody wants to be the second choice or the last person chosen to play football, okay? Do not, write your statement of interest around the research interest of the faculty member you're liking or you want to study with. Do not write a generic letter. So each application, you're identifying a specific person in that university. You're reading their literature. You're writing a statement of interest that falls around their research agenda, okay? So you're tailoring what you do to each program. You should not write a generic letter because the programs see the generic letter and they say, so how interested were you in this program and how many other programs did you apply to? Are you really interested in here? So a generic letter is not a good letter. Also, speak to why you want to study psychology, okay? What you want to do with your graduate degree once you've finished. Do not put too much personal information about what motivates you to study psychology. So it's interesting to know that you've had several cousins who've had problems, or your next door neighbor was an alcoholic, or you struggled through things yourself, that isn't things that are really, graduate programs are not really that interested. What they're more interested in is, if we take you in, what use are you going to make of the training we give you? So simply say, this is the area I'm interested in. I want to study industrial organizational psychology. I plan, once I finish, to open up a consulting practice once I've gotten several years, etc. Okay? So don't provide too much personal information. Again, apply to many schools and be strategic. Apply to the best, the worst, and somewhat questionable. Okay. Then identify faculty at UE who can write a good reference for you. Okay. Make sure the person can write a good reference for you and that they know you. We can write a letter for you, and maybe you got an A in the course that we taught you. So we know you're a good student, but beyond that, you're one of 100 people in one of our lectures. So it begins to be a little difficult to really provide a tailored reference, okay? So always use a faculty member to act as a reference. Do not use your pastor, former boss, etc. Make sure you have an academic providing your reference, okay? When you're looking for faculty, ask those lecturers from whom you've gotten an A grade to act as your referee, okay? Make sure that in your process of taking classes, visit the faculty. We have office hours and virtually no one ever visits us. We're lonely people. We like to see people during our office hours, but nobody stops by until the end of the semester. And then we don't have time. So make sure that the faculty member who's going to provide a reference for you knows you and can write something specifically about you. Okay, they can sell you to the program. Once you've gotten the agreement, send the lecturer your ID number so they can check on your academic progress, okay, how well you're doing. You should also send them a resume so that they can better comment on your skills, knowledge, activity. There are many students who apply and they just say, oh, you know, each year I went to UA, I won a scholarship. But, you know, that's not important. Everyone wins a scholarship. They don't mention things, or they have a work experience or experience working as a research assistant that would give them a leg up. But the faculty member doesn't know that. So send them a copy of your resume, okay? Make sure, yes, I said, make sure your referee knows you well. Ask your referee if they're willing to review your statement of intent and your application, okay? If you've had any problems in your life along the way that might have reduced your overall GPA, talk to them briefly. Tell them you had a rough patch, but don't go into too much detail. Explain how this rough patch has impacted your grades and the steps you've taken to overcome whatever problem you have. And by doing this, you demonstrate that you're mature, self-aware, and you're taking responsibility for your academic achievement. Those are good qualities to have. So even though you might have had a bad year, which dropped your GPA down and you've done better, we can say, okay, you hit a rough patch. You've taken responsibility for whatever was leading you to do poorly, or you've gotten help, whether that's some kind of physical help. One of the big problems we have in graduate school is someone dying in the family or a traffic accident. And often people are traumatized. They don't want to take a break. And for the next year, they generally do poorly. Remember, an academic transcript is like a criminal record. It follows you through your life. So if you hit a rough patch and you think possibly it may not, you're taking it a little roughly, take a year off, okay? We did a study of the people who were asked to withdraw when I was associate dean for the faculty. And what we found is that most of the students who were asked to withdraw due to low academic performance, they had a serious health problem. Someone very close to them died. They were in an accident, or they had severe financial problems. Okay, so do not underestimate the impact that some traumatic event will have on your GPA. Okay. Right. Okay. Get some experience in conducting research. This can be done in two ways. By doing the year-long research paper, and I know there's only 10 or 12 people who can do that, or act as a research assistant to a faculty member. Okay? That's the second preferred choice, but it shows that you have some interest in research and also you have some experience in doing research. Okay? Research experience weighs heavily in making a decision about a candidate. This experience doesn't have to be in psychology, but it can be through a summer job you did. It can be through a faculty member in MedSci, etc. The experience does not necessarily have to be in psychology, okay? So lecturers are always looking for students to help them out on their research. Volunteer to be a research assistant. If you're asked to do an interview and it's a face-to-face interview, dress as a professional in the field would dress. Don't dress overly well like you're going to a fete. Don't be too casual. Look at what people who are in that field, how they dress, okay? Find out what questions you might be asked by students who've already gotten into the program that you're applying for, okay? Generally, we ask the same sets of questions every year of people. Anticipate questions that the interview panel may ask. It's likely they're going to ask you what you did in your research paper or as a research assistant. So be prepared to talk about this in detail. They may ask you what courses you did best in and which ones you did the worst in. Okay, be prepared to talk about the courses you've taken and acknowledge any problems you've had and how you would deal with them in the future. The interview process examines not only what you know, but also your personal suitability for the program. Interviewers are looking for maturity, self-awareness, knowledge of the field, and your seriousness of purpose for studying, that you're a serious student interested in this area. Okay, so on to where you should apply, okay? Countries differ in their approach and the degree of support they provide to graduate students. Generally in the US, few students get financial help or assistance in funding their master's degree, but usually they get help with their PhD. The US does not give you money to go to school. Also, many programs look at foreign students as a source of income to supplement their students, and they typically charge very high fees. There's a very prominent university in the US that preys upon foreign students. I'd say 2/3 of their students are foreign students because their reputation leads people to apply. They take in 100 people to do the PhD. They give you a professional PhD, not an academic doctorate or PhD. They give you something like a doctor of education, a doctor of psychology, etc., but not a PhD. Okay? So many programs prey upon foreign students, particularly in the US. Generally, the faculty in the US tend to be somewhat distant, and they're only interested in your academic life. The quality of the programs in the US and the access to faculty varies dramatically from program to program. Generally, the more prestigious the institution, the less likely you're going to see your research supervisor. And that has an impact on how quickly you pass. And if you might be one of 30 students they're supervising, they're not going to give you a lot of care and attention. There are many programs in the US that are not particularly good. We have people who apply from the US, and we see that they have courses in bowling, fitness, and pottery on their transcript. And when we first initially looked, we thought, oh, you're learning something like phys ed about bowling. When we asked the candidates about these questionable courses, they said, oh, I got 3 credits for spending 3 hours a week bowling. Got 5 credits for doing fitness. I did, aerobics 5 times in a week. And the pottery one was, well, they had a pottery class. Those things do not look good on your transcript. That is not uncommon in a foreign university, in a US university. The quality of education in the US and their universities are very comparable to the universities in India. In India, they have a small number of very prestigious institutions, high quality, highly respected. And then from there, there's a big drop from that level, and then another big drop down to the 3rd tier. It's the same in the US. The Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, UCLA, University of Michigan, those are the top programs. Once you go down from that program down to University of Maryland or University of Nevada, is a big substantial drop in quality of people who attend and the quality of the faculty. Okay, the quality of education you'll get. And then in the 3rd tier, those are the worst. And at the bottom, those are the people you see on TV. Never apply to one of those programs you see on TV. Any university that has to advertise for students wants to make money off of you and are largely going to try and exploit you, and probably are not that good a university, because most universities, particularly for graduate school, have far more people than who apply than they can ever admit. So Walden, University of Phoenix, University of Southern New Hampshire, Grand Canyons University, ITT Tech. Don't even think about applying. You'll be left with a huge amount of debt and likely a degree that is not respected. Okay. In Canada, it's a very different picture. Virtually all students who do a graduate degree in psychology receive some form of financial support. And this is because the federal government, half of the post-secondary costs of university are paid for by the province, half are paid for by the federal government. The federal government allots money specifically to support graduate students. The idea in Canada is that you should not be working and going to graduate school at the same time. Working and going to graduate school is a crazy thing to do, even if you're doing both of them part-time. So in Canada, virtually everyone who is studying gets some form of financial aid. What that will mean is you get an outright scholarship, which means you don't have to do any teaching duties. Most often, you will do a teaching assistantship. At the worst, they may ask you to mark the midterm exam for an intro psych class. You're supposed to work on average 15 hours a week. Typically, you might be lucky if it averages 3 hours a week, okay? But they have up to 15 hours, okay? The financial support you'll get for many of the universities will cover your tuition, your cost of living, and the supplies you need to go to school, okay? So you will get good financial support. You're not going to live a high life, but you will get adequate support to make it through the program, okay? Your research supervisor in Canada is responsible for your personal well-being and is required to assist you in both your academic and non-academic life. So typically when you meet your supervisor, one of the first things they will say or ask you is, so where are you living? Do you have an adequate place? Do you have all the things you need? Do you need pots and pans? And surprisingly, they may give you their old set of pots and pans if you don't have any, okay? So your supervisor is responsible for your personal well-being as well as your academic well-being. Faculty generally have a much closer relationship to students than they do in the US. In Canada, once you're in graduate school, nobody is doctor or professor. They're now Barry or Amanda, etc. They're all on a first name basis, okay? They often socialize with the students, and you may be, or quite often will be asked to their homes. In fact, every program I've gone to, at least once a semester, there is a departmental party and all the graduate students turn up and you see where the faculty members live and you see their families, which can be positive and which can be negative, okay? Lecturers tend to see the graduate students, not so much as students, but as junior colleagues. The quality of the programs is more uniformly good. There's not a lot of difference in quality between Canadian universities. That's because they are tightly controlled by the provincial and federal governments. They do not start a program in clinical psychology unless there is a need for people in that field. So there's a much greater investment in universities and post-secondary education. So they make certain that the quality is good, okay? Also in Canada, it's very likely that once you finish your degree, that you'll be invited to stay. Remember, Canada needs people. So one of the ways they screen people for migration is graduate school. It used to be that if you finished your PhD, you could apply for citizenship. You'd be a citizen by the time you finished your PhD. Now they give you 2 years, I think, after your master's degree of a work permit, and I think 3 years. You need to spend 3 years in Canada to obtain citizenship. So basically, once you finish, they want you to stay as a citizen, okay? There are some programs in Canada that see foreign students as a source of income. Those programs tend to be in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and to a certain extent, Quebec, okay? Those are the programs where you'll get a scholarship, it will cover your tuition, but you'll have to come up for the money for living expenses and books, etc. Okay. Generally, Australia and New Zealand, like Canada, they offer funding to virtually all the students, high quality of education. I haven't heard of a poor Australian university, and I have colleagues who teach in New Zealand and who have attended New Zealand, and they have very good universities in New Zealand. The programs that they offer are all research-based. They're all MPhil PhD programs. So when you apply to a program, Australia, New Zealand, you're applying to an academic program, okay? You're applying to a doctoral research-based program. Professional training is given via a graduate certificate. So you'll be enrolled in an MPhil PhD program. And also, if you're doing clinical psychology, a graduate certificate in clinical psychology. Like most good universities, they give you an academic PhD. Unlike other disciplines, the standard is a PhD. You must, in psychology, you must both be an academic as well as a practitioner if you're in one of the professional areas of psychology. If you're in clinical, applied social, industrial organizational, ergonomics, those fields. So you not only do what you would do for a PhD, but you add on extra. So in the UK, pardon me, in Australia, New Zealand, programs are MPhil PhD, okay? There are some programs that tend to see the student as, they see students as a source of money. Okay. Right. Some European programs offer funding for the MPhil PhD. Most of the European programs will see the students as a source of funding. Generally, good quality education. In Europe, you enter a faculty member's research lab to be trained as a researcher, and you become part of the factory to produce knowledge. So they bring in the undergraduates to do their research paper, who are supervised by the master's students, who are supervised by the PhDs. The postdocs review the paper, and the professor who has the lab glances over it, says, maybe you ask a couple of questions, and then out it goes. So many of the faculty have these, in Europe, very long list of publications because they're running a knowledge factory, okay? Some countries promote migration. I had a student who applied to Norway. She didn't do very well at UE. They didn't care. The questions they asked her was around community involvement, how she viewed other people, people who were disadvantaged, people who had problems. They were more interested in how she would fit into Norwegian society, which is very communally oriented, than they were in her academic performance, because they essentially said, if you manage to get a bachelor's degree, you probably could get a master's or PhD. Okay. There are three major graduate programs at UWI. There is a MSc in clinical psychology in Jamaica, MSc in counseling in Barbados, and in Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, they have an MSc in applied psychology. The people in Barbados and Trinidad copied what we did. Clinical psychology, they charge 500,000 Jamaican a year. It goes up and changes as the US dollar changes. This year, we are increasing the tuition fees for the applied psychology program to $330 per year. What we have found is, believe it or not, some people have applied to the MSc in applied psychology, and they say, when we ask them, why did you apply? They say, you have the cheapest master's degree, and I want a master's degree. So we have increased the fees in part for that. And also, our fees are out of line with other fees, okay? We only offer funding for an MPhil PhD. Here at UWI, the MSc programs are termed taught programs. The MPhil PhDs are considered research programs, degrees by higher research. You have more attention if you're an MPhil PhD student. UWI offers you about $900,000 a year. Most of the people who are an MPhil PhD will be getting that. In the MSc, they charge you, Mona School of Business, it's about $1 million a year, etc. So they're looking at you as a source of income, okay? Generally, UWI has high quality education. UWI is a well-respected university internationally, contrary to what people in Jamaica think. I knew of UWI when I was in Canada. I didn't have a question about coming here. I knew this was a very, very good institution to come to, okay? Our program in Jamaica, we are more closely aligning the applied and clinical program, because we found in the clinical program, they have way too many courses in the MSc. They provide you with all the training that you need up to what you do for a PhD, but they don't give you adequate training in statistics, research methods, psychometrics in particular, okay? And in the MSc in applied psychology, we don't give you enough practical experience and train you in some of the fundamental skills. So we are in the process of revising both of those programs. And what we're planning to do is essentially move into an MPhil PhD, okay? We don't want to offer MSCs because as a program, we have a lot of pressure to make money off of students. If as a MSc taught program, whereas in an MPhil PhD, they do not ask questions about how many students you have in the program. They simply accept that you took 6 people this year. They're happy you took 6 people, okay? The training in psychology is very intensive, unlike training in another area like management studies or English language. We need to pay a lot of attention and supervision of students. So that is another reason we're moving towards an MPhil. We can give you greater attention. And finally, the end point for professional practice in psychology is generally considered to be a PhD. If you manage to get into the MSc, you can do the PhD. But we currently don't have one. So what you have to do is apply abroad. The program you're in for your master's degree will likely be the program that you do your PhD in or at. There's an expectation once you're admitted to the master's degree that you'll go on to the PhD. So the only students who don't continue on are the students who do exceptionally poorly, drop out, those who die, fail out, drop out, or die. So there's limited number of PhD spots open if you want to transfer a program. To transfer between one graduate program to another, to do your MSc in one place and PhD in another, you have to be very bright, very, very bright, because there isn't space, essentially. They take their own first, okay? Okay, suggested programs, clinical psychology in Canada, Simon Fraser, top Canadian university. They have the best approach to students. Simon Fraser is kind of like the anti-UE. Everything UE does badly, Simon Fraser does well. For example, if you get above a certain GPA as an undergraduate, they refund your tuition. I did my bachelor's degree at Simon Fraser, and once I switched into psychology, I never paid tuition after that. I just continued to win the, they called it? The tuition refund scholarship. In fact, I never really considered it a scholarship. So they support their students well. And it's very egalitarian. The president of the university at Simon Fraser has to stand in line to get the parking pass to park his car on the top of the mountain. Can't send his administrative assistant. He stands in line, or she, with everybody else. So it's very egalitarian. High quality of training in clinical psychology. University of Saskatchewan is also very good. You probably don't know this, but Saskatchewan was the place where community mental health was created, and perhaps they have considered the best mental health care system in the world, by far better than any other province in Canada and any other where in the world. University of Ottawa, first school in clinical psychology. Faculty members are very student friendly, and they have relatively smaller numbers of people applying. Also, while they charge an astronomical tuition fee because you are a foreign student, they also give you a scholarship automatically to drop the fees to what a Canadian pays. And they also give you a scholarship or teaching assistantship. But few people apply there because in order to leave with your degree, any degree, you have to be fluently bilingual in French and English. And half the courses you'll take will be in French, half the courses you take will be in English, and they do that deliberately. So many people simply don't want to become bilingual, and they avoid the University of Ottawa, despite the high quality of training. University of New Brunswick. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia were the only provinces in Canada where psychologists were licensed. Licensing meaning that there are specific things that only a psychologist can do. Your report that you write is considered a medical prescription. The rest of Canada follows the APA. Your report is a piece of paper, has no legal bearing. There's not a set of acts that are protected by and only by psychologists can do. So the training at University of New Brunswick is very, very strict, okay? They actually have rules on how many feet, if you are practicing giving a intelligence test, how many feet away a faculty member who is licensed must be, okay? And as a student, you register with the College of Psychologists. So it's a very, very strict program, very high quality. They do not have a master's program. You go right into a PhD. You get more money by doing that, and you leave with a PhD. Concordia, University of Montreal, also a very good program in clinical psychology. In the US, University of California at Los Angeles has a good clinical program. University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and that's the only one you want to go to in North Carolina. University of Washington also has a good clinical psychology program. In applied psychology, Canada is about 20 years ahead of countries in the US and other places. There are really 3 to 4 programs. And I should mention, applied psychology involves generally everything outside of clinical and counseling psychology and probably psychometric. So here you're doing community development, you're doing industrial organizational psychology, you're doing ergonomics, etc. Okay. University of Guelph, they have probably the best program. University of Windsor, Memorial University, they offered the lowest tuition fees for graduate students in Canada. I think it was about 2,500 Canadian dollars, but they're now increasing them because too many students are applying because they're a good bargain. University of Saskatchewan is a reasonably good program, but the quality in applied psychology has dropped as a key faculty member has left and was recruited to a US university. In the US, Claremont Graduate School, probably the best program in applied psychology. Stanford has a very good program in applied social psychology. They don't call it applied social psychology, but many of the faculty members are involved in applying social psychology and understand how to do it. University of Rochester in New York and University of Texas also have good programs. For industrial organizational psychology, University of Guelph in Canada, that is considered to have the second best program in the world. Very, very tough to get into. So if you're not doing so well in your GPA, apply to the applied social program. University of Calgary and Windsor, they also offer high quality programs in IO psychology. In the US, Claremont Graduate School, I had one student who went to University of San Diego, and believe it or not, a not so well-known university, University of Akron as well. In Europe, there's a wonderful program, the Erasmus program. They offer a master's degree in work, organizational, and personal psychology. When you leave with 2 master's degrees. You study in 2 separate countries. Okay. So it's an excellent program. They give you a scholarship to take the program. I think it's about 12,000 euros a year, and they pay for you to fly back and forth once a year between your home country and where you're staying, which is either Spain, Portugal, or Italy. Wonderful places to spend your time. And they ask you to do a internship or a semester outside of their regular programs. We've had 3 students apply who've gotten in. 2 of them continued on and to, I think, one finished her degree and the other is just finishing. The other student got an offer from University of Calgary, which she took. They gave her a little more money and she thought it was closer to home, okay? Forensic psychology in Canada, Simon Fraser or the University of Saskatchewan. The reason those 2 programs, the programs in clinical psychology, are directly integrated with the correctional service in Canada. The correctional service in Canada does not focus on punishment. They focus very much on rehabilitation. Simon Fraser is considered to have the world's best program in criminology. The criminology, psychology programs are very closely aligned, okay? In the US, John Jay College, and for the social side, the University of Washington is a good program. Neuropsychology, Canada invented the field of clinical neuropsychology with the work of Brenda Milner. She's now 101 years old and she still supervises students and is still a faculty member. She's proud to say she is not a retired faculty member or what they call emeritus professor. She is still a full professor, but she won't take on PhD students. So McGill is where they develop the clinical neuropsychology. If you've ever read about HM, Brenda Milner did the studies of her. They also have at McGill University, the Montreal Neurological Institute, world-renowned. McMaster is very well. University of Victoria in British Columbia, they have one of the best programs in clinical neuropsychology in the world, okay? In the US, the only good one I know of is University of Arizona. Okay, so that's all I have to say to you, and I'm opening the floor to your questions. Please don't be shy. Ask as many questions as you can.
Hi, sir. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, I wanted to know, do you have any suggestions for sports psychology?
Sports psychology, yes.
Which university would be the best suited? Yeah.
I would say an Australian university. I don't know which one specifically. Okay. The Australians have invested a lot of money in sports psychology. The person who would know would be one of our former students in the applied program, Dr. Olivia Rose. So if you wanted to know which program in sports psychology, she would be the person to ask.
Okay, sir. How can I get in contact with her?
Oh, I believe she works for UE now. She was the sports psychologist for UE. She went to several events where UE went. She didn't go to the Olympics. She missed out on that. But she's here and I can give you her contact information, her email where you can contact her.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Other questions?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Do you have any recommendations for counseling psychology?
Okay. Counseling psychology would be University of Calgary. Generally in Canada, counseling psychology is done through education, okay? So they generally offer a master's or sometimes a PhD in counseling. In Canada, if you can't get into a program in clinical psychology, you apply to one in educational psychology because they train you to be a clinical psychologist working with children and parents. So you get the same training essentially. The competition is not as stringent.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Someone asked in the chat, and I think it's a really good question. It's what is the best route for someone interested in forensic and clinical psychology?
Okay, forensic clinical psychology. Apply to Simon Fraser, University of Saskatchewan. Okay, those would be the two probably, well, Simon Fraser is considered the best in the world for that. University of Saskatchewan is very well as well because they're integrated. If you want to do forensic psychology and you can't get into those two institutions, then what you can do is find an internship site in a correctional facility and someone who can supervise you in a correctional facility. And I can probably suggest that there'll be a lot of people who, not a lot of people apply to those settings for internships. Okay, what's the process in becoming a neuropsychologist? That depends upon whether you want clinical neuropsychology or whether you want to do the more academic side of neuropsychology. What you would do, the clinical side, you have two sort of routes. You apply directly to a program that has a program, MSc, PhD in clinical neuropsychology, or you first do a academic degree, and then you transfer over into a PhD in neuropsychology. And surprisingly, the competition is much less strong in neuropsychology. Some programs will also provide you training in neuropsychology. So what you can do is if you get into a general clinical program, you try and get experience working in a hospital or a neurology clinic. Okay, how important is it to do research in IO psychology? Very important. Any area of psychology, one of the critical criteria or competencies in psychology is research. So we place a great deal of attention on your ability to do research. Remember, psychology is a science, not a social science. Psychology is recognized as a science like physics, chemistry, biology. It's an accident of fate that we ended up in the social sciences, okay?
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes.
Do you know if there's any research projects going on at UA right now, especially with COVID? How would one be able to help as a research assistant?
They have a small group of people doing research on COVID at UA. However, I wouldn't advise you to do research on COVID for two reasons. One, there's a very large number of people studying COVID right now. So if you wish to publish your papers, there's strong competition, okay? The second reason is likely by the time you finished getting ethical approval and conducting your study, it's likely that COVID will be forgotten about, okay? How
Okay,
many
I
of
was
you are swine flu or the
I was
H1N? Yes?
no, sorry to interrupt you. I was asking in terms of how do I go about being a research assistant for any research, not necessarily COVID, but just any research that's
Any
going on at UA. Yeah, during this time.
What you would do is find a faculty member that is in an area you like to do work in and approach them. Most faculty will have a program of research. If they wish to stay at the university, you have to have a program of interest. One of the things they ask faculty to do is to publish at least 2 papers per year, and they're becoming increasingly devoted to that now at UE. And North American universities, if after 6 years you don't have 12 papers, they wave goodbye to you and you leave, and it's unlikely you'll never get another post in a university. You won't get tenure.
All right, Dr. Lip, someone is asking in the YouTube chat, considering the University of New Brunswick, where they jump right into the PhD for clinical psychology, is it a difficult college to get into as it relates to their requirements?
Like the other programs, they have a high number of people who apply. Many people, though, read that psychology is a licensed profession in New Brunswick, and they don't quite understand what that means. They think about, what was that? In the US, they call some psychologists licensed, and in Jamaica, they do. It's a meaningless term for most places, but in New Brunswick, it is taken very seriously. So UNB is a not so hard program to get into. There are other programs that offer direct PhD as well. So they're not the only ones. If you can get into a master's program in psychology, you can do a PhD. So usually they just, by tradition, have left an MSc and PhD, but the idea is you're essentially in a PhD once you come into the MSc. They just find that it shortens the process down by about year to 2 years, and they keep on the books the MSc degree for people who they made a mistake in admitting. So they give them the booby prize and wave goodbye to them with the MSc. Other questions? Okay, what other direct entry PhD programs? Off the top of my head, I really don't know. There increasingly programs are moving in psychology to a PhD, like we are at UWI. MPhil PhD. MPhil PhD means you're going on the road to getting a PhD. Anyone who leaves with an MPhil generally couldn't do the PhD. That's why they leave with the MPhil. Okay.
Excuse me, sir. I
Yes.
remember once when you were talking, probably wasn't this session, but you were talking about the difference between a PsyD and a PhD, and you were saying that the
Yes.
PsyD wasn't really best when it comes to academia. I'm wondering if it's the same for the UK equivalent with the doctorate in clinical psych, the DClin psych.
Yes, yes. In the UK, psychologists used to be licensed at the master's level. I was trained by people who were licensed in the UK. You spend half of your time in university and then half the time on a psychiatric ward in a hospital or a clinic. But with the reform of the healthcare system in the UK, they stopped licensing psychologists. And so they started opening up PsyD programs. Those are for people who are kind of like, they can't get into a PhD, essentially. It's very expensive. You're better off going right into a PhD, MPhil PhD, and then getting training alongside that in clinical psychology. So some programs still offer an MSc, but beyond that, you do a PhD. The reason is if you have a PsyD or Doctor of Psychology, it's not considered an earned doctorate. You will not be able to hold a post in a university, teach a university course, or do a job that involves research. You will be able to do jobs that involve clinical practice. PsyDs have gone out of favor because the idea was that you would give people more clinical experience and they would do something called a research paper rather than a dissertation. What they found was everyone essentially was doing a dissertation and no one was doing a research paper, so the students were becoming shortchanged. So many of the programs like Baylor University got rid of the PsyD program, went into PhD.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So basically, not much advantage. And now they kind of, look down upon people with PsyDs. Let me put it that way. Yes. Yes. Unfortunately true, yes.
Okay, so there's not quite a question, but someone is asking about the emeritus scholarship at the University of Bologna, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but I'm assuming it's Bologna.
Oh, University of what?
Bologna, this is how it's spelled. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but
Okay. I'm not on the YouTube channel, so I couldn't. Oh, Bologna. Oh, one of the oldest universities in the world. That's the one which has the Erasmus Scholarship in Work, Organizational, and Personnel Psychology. They call it the WAP program, which is a derogative term for people who are of Italian descent. I'm sure they didn't know that when they created the acronym. What's the process? Well, you apply for people in Jamaica, apply for the Erasmus Scholarship. If you're doing the program or you're interested in Iowa psychology. They look very favorably upon students from UE. The fact that we've had 3 people be accepted into that very competitive scholarship says our students are very highly regarded. Also, if you get your PhD from Bologna, you get a wonderful outfit to wear, a beautiful pompadour hat, a feather. So if you ever become an academic, you'll notice that not everyone wears the same regalia. The people from Bologna, because it's one of the oldest universities in the world, have the most colorful regalia. How hard is it to get into a program in Canada? They have between 100 to 300 people. They take 6 to 8. So it's very difficult. In Europe, I know about Germany. In Germany, they didn't have a bachelor's degree. You entered into university as an undergraduate and you left with what essentially was a master's degree in psychology. And it would have been a degree in clinical psychology. So the psychology students in Germany were the top students. from German high schools. Now they have, since they've created a bachelor's, master's, PhD, it's much easier to get into. There are many schools that will accept foreign students in Europe. However, they will charge astronomical tuition fees. The Netherlands, very likely to accept you, but you have to come up with the 20,000 euros to attend. So they're looking at you to make money. Scandinavian programs, Norway, we've had one student apply, more than one, Norway. We have one student who went to Finland, considered to go to Denmark. They generally will give you financial support. If you're doing the PhD, you become an employee, you become a lecturer in essence, and you get funding. So easier for Europe than North America. How do you go about becoming an industrial organizational psychologist? You enter into a program in applied social psychology or a program in industrial organizational psychology. Unlike clinical, you can leave and get a very well-paying job with a master's degree. Relatively few people go on to do a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. In fact, we've been looking for someone to teach that at UE for more than 15 years. We haven't been able to identify anyone that we could pay adequately. And they usually, once they come in as a lecturer, they get the salary of a professor, and it goes up from there. So they're very highly paid. So you enter a program, do your practical training in that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dr. Lips, I know many persons might still have questions, but we're kind of running out of time. So is there an email address or a phone number that you'd like to share where people can contact you to ask you follow-up questions?
I will put my email address in the chat, okay? And I will try to answer in about 2 days, but I'm quite busy right now. I have a lot of assignments to mark and many references to write for students. So I will do my best to answer quickly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Lips, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. On behalf of the Psychology Students Association, we would like to extend a huge thank you for making and carving the time out to be here, to educate us and to provide us with information on preparing to apply for graduate studies. Emphasis on the saving, the process, the programs used to screen applicants, and providing some of the eye-opening truths, and some strategies to improve acceptance, and of course, where to apply for universities, and making the time to answer the questions of our members. Once again, I thank you so much, and we definitely look forward to hearing from you again, and we wish you all the best going forward in your continued profession. Once again, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to come and talk to the Psychology Students Association. It's almost going to say the Guild of Psychology Students. Not quite yet. Okay, so it's a pleasure to have given the opportunity, and I wish you well in your future pursuits and application. Okay, so I will bid you farewell.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for coming out to another week of PSA. We really hope that you were able to absorb all of that information. Should you have the need to, revisit anything that was said, the video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can always check us out there. It's the UWMONA Psychology Students Association. So thank you guys for coming out again.
Bye, everyone.